Chapter 16. My Polish Savior. Pity and empathy are the first emotions to go AWOL during wartime. Once the doctor had spoken his fateful words, my German commandant cavalry decided to wash his hands of me. I was loaded back like a sack of grain onto a cart and dumped on board a train bound for Hammerstein. What was the bounce with What with the bouncing and jolting of the train railroad car, I was wondering I made it there. It's a wonder I made it there alive. I remember that the guard, another elderly local man I assumed was traveling to Hammerstein on personal business, who escorted me back to Stalag IAB, was totally unnecessary. There was absolutely not the slightest possibility of escape open to me. Most of the time I was just one overriding sensation: pain. Somehow, by the mercy of God and my own stubborn will, I endured the indescribable agony of traveling that distance in critical condition. To my fellow passengers, all ordinary Germans going about their business of trying to somehow live normal lives amidst the privations of war, I was nothing but a morbid curiosity. This time, when I passed through the prison gates, I was too sick to feel or care about anything. I must have looked like a walking corpse because lots of my fellow POWs averted their eyes when they saw me. Can't blame them. They had troubles enough on their own. I collapsed almost immediately upon arrival and had to be carried to what a Red Cross bulletin described as a well-equipped camp hospital emergency room. What a joke. The place was dingy and dirty, staffed mostly by POWs, many of whom had little EMT training. With medical supplies woefully inadequate for the German war effort, it stands to reason that there would be precious few such resources sent to a hospital for imprisoned enemy soldiers. So it was pure blind luck, or again, the will of God. I prefer to believe the latter, that a Polish doctor imprisoned at Stalag IAB was working at the camp hospital that day. He spoke not a word of English, but took one look at me and must have known that something had to be done or I was a goner. It's probably a good thing he couldn't speak English. I'm sure some of the words I said during the procedure weren't complimentary. The doctor got to work at once. He motioned to my companions that I had to be laid down on an operating table and then gestured for 3 of them to help. These hastily procured attendants were directed to restrain me because there was no anesthetic available. On some level, I must have been aware that no painkiller of any kind was forthcoming and braced myself the best I could. All I can remember is being enveloped in a shroud of agony, delirious with fever, weak from dehydration and malnutrition. Of course I was hallucinating, but clearly I saw my beautiful Elaine standing over me, smiling in that sweet way she still does. My mother stood right beside her, but her face was stern. I had seen that expression many times before, when I'd skinned my knee, been ambushed by the neighborhood bully, or fallen off the hay wagon. I knew what she was trying to tell me. Barak up, Gerald. You're tough. You're at Johnson. I had no choice. My buddies held me fast, and the face of my loved ones faded away as the doctor appeared over me, mumbling something uncomprehendable. Perhaps he was trying to apologize for what he was about to do. I don't know. What I do know is that suddenly he pressed down firmly on my chest, gave my back a quick jerk, and re-broke the shoulder and collarbone that weren't healed properly. That's all I remember. I must have passed out from the pain. The next thing I recall was that I was fitted for a crude makeshift cast. Where the doctor got the plaster of Paris to make the cast, I hadn't the clue. But when it hardened, my arm was immobilized out in front of me in an upraised position. Try sleeping like that sometime. Well, there was still a lot of bone ache. I immediately had a medium come of relief. By the way, tests later showed that the doctor did one hell of a job. I can just barely see the evidence of my injury on an x-ray of my shoulder today. When it looked as if I would live, I was sent to the infirmary to recuperate. The process was slow, but my young body and determined spirit once again came into play. I began to feel better, and the physical anguish of my injury gave way to the pain of missing my family, especially Elaine. I longed for a letter, sometimes unable to distinguish between the physical and emotional hurt I was experiencing. Then, just like that, on December 1, 1944, my name came up at mail call. I had 2 letters from home. I was ecstatic when I received those letters, one from my mother and one from Elaine. It didn't matter that they were almost 5 months old. It had evidently taken a long time to be forwarded to me from the farm, probably due to the deteriorating conditions all over war-ravaged Germany. Of course, I opened Elaine's first. It was newsy, affectionate, and thankfully affirming, and she was waiting for me just as she had promised. Then came my mother's. Upon reading her words, I was relieved to learn that my younger brother Leroy would not be joining the army until next spring. I promised I would pray every day that by March the war would be over and we would all be going home. Must have felt so much better. I managed to have a buddy pick up a pencil to write back. dictating off letters I had hoped would not take months to be delivered. My right arm was still in that cumbersome cast, and I had no choice but to have someone else write. Amazingly, the penmanship is not that much different in those letters, just a bit more relaxed than my usual scrawl. Elaine says she remembers wondering why my handwriting looked so scribbled at the time. As we read the letter I sent to my mother, I noticed it did not contain a single word about what I was going through. Suffice it to say, I intentionally made the contents very vague. Why? Well, bad news from home is an ultimate grief for a foreign soldier. Sending bad news home is equally repugnant. The conventional thinking is that my family was worried enough and didn't need the added stress of my complaints. Thus, the soldiers' letters home take on a spin all their own. Like all the others, the letters I wrote that day are in the scrapbook. In it, I never mentioned my injury or how close I had come to never seeing my loved ones again. December 3rd, 1944. Dear Mother, I will this Sunday write a few lines to tell you I'm in good health and hope the same to all of you. I received a letter from you this morning dated 28th of July. Also, nice letters from Elaine. I suppose somebody is very busy now with the holidays coming up. I sure wish I was there to spend them with you. This makes 2 Christmases I have been away, and it seems like ages. But let's hope I can be there next year. I was glad to hear that Leroy got a deferment till March. I suppose he's quite a man now. Tell him to take care of himself. Have a close Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Love, Gerard. 2 weeks later, to mark Christmas Day, 1944, I used one of the meager rations of letters to write to my father. My right arm was still immobilized, and again I asked my friend to write a short note to my dad. I was still in a lot of pain, couldn't find a comfortable position for sleeping, and experienced the worst case of sickness I had ever had. But for some unexplicable reason, things just seemed brighter. I don't know if it was a bunch of foolish GIs doing some Christmas wishing, but the camp was rife with rumors of a big invasion that would be the beginning of the end of Hitler. Again, notice that due to the censorship and not wanting to send worrisome news, my note says practically nothing about my situation. December 17th, 1944. Dear Father, I will this Christmas drop you a few lines to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I'm in good health and hope to be there to spend the next one. Love, your son Gerard. By mid-January, I was feeling so much better physically that I was able to not only tell my parents that I had occurred in November, but to admit that I was lonely. I couldn't tell them that but we were also hearing news reports accompanied by wild rumors that Hitler had been assassinated, that Mussolini had been executed, that the Russians were advancing into Germany. We weren't sure what was or wasn't true, but we knew something was happening. Our rations had been cut again and again, and all that stood between me and starvation was those blessed PKGs. But at least my shoulder was healed enough that my medic could cut off the cast and I could write my own letters once again. Here's the first one, a letter of January 17th. Notice how desperately I tried not to sound desperate. December 17th, 1945. Dear Mother, I will this lonely Saturday evening sit down and write you a few lines, hoping to find you all in good health. I suppose you wondered why you got them poor letters from me. Well, it was a little accident, and I broke my shoulder on the 10th day of November and have been in the hospital since then. I'm much better now. They took the cast off last week, so please don't worry. I'm as good as can be expected. I hope you all had a nice Christmas. Will you greet all the folks around home for me? I've been getting mail and PKGs also. Keep sending them PKGs. Space is limited, so I'll have to sign off. Your son, Gerard.